It's the closest thing to being annoyed. It's Cybernoid, an NES Works episode 169.
We became a Brady Bunch.
Welcome to the shortest episode of NES Works ever. Cybernoid is a tiny little slip of a game, barely even worth talking about. So why, you may wonder, does this episode top 10 minutes in length? Well, friends, in the time-honored tradition of YouTube creators desperately struggling to hit the video duration that the algorithm supposedly favors, I'm going to talk about a bunch of things that are not Cybernoid. But don't worry, this YouTube creator is built different. Instead of making my way to the topic at hand through a tortuous, labyrinthine journey of nonsense, I will instead jump straight to the matter at hand. Cybernoid comes to us courtesy of Acclaim. Well, maybe courtesy is the wrong word here. This feels more like a burden than a gift, if we're being honest. This is another of those late 1989 releases that feels wildly behind the curve compared to so many other games the console has seen in this period. While Mega Man 2 and DuckTales were out there wrecking the curve with flawless marks in their honors courses, we have games like Cybernoid, held back in after-school detention alongside Back to the Future, for constantly eating their erasers during math class. Cybernoid consists of 3 levels, each containing a couple dozen screens of hazards that the player must navigate in order to reach a goal before time runs out. Not that anything bad happens if time does run out, but there's a timer in the corner nevertheless. You control something that appears to be a space pod that doesn't so much fly through the stages as fall with, well, it's not quite style exactly. But you need to navigate the world by avoiding or destroying hazards while approximating flight by pressing up to rise and releasing it in order to drop slowly and let Mavity have its way with you. You have a variety of weapons built into your flight pod, which I suppose is the Cybernoid referred to in the title. It is a fighting machine, more or less. It comes equipped with secondary weapons, which you can fire with the B button and select on the fly with, as it happens, the select key. You need to employ your sub-weapons tactically, because some of them are the only thing that can clear specific barriers that block your path. The bounce weapon can break barriers situated above or below your ship. Essentially, since your primary laser can only fire forward. You also have a bomb that can fire at an upward or downward angle to smash pink blocks, and a shield that grants you a few seconds of invincibility. Shield is actually the best tool in the game, because Cybernoid is hard. It's not the kind of hard that comes from artfully crafted challenges that result organically from great hazard design and precise controls which allow you to weave your way through seemingly impossible danger. My recent effort to tinker with the design of LJN's Jaws really reminded me of the fact that a well-programmed game with excellent controls and physics can withstand a lot of difficulty increases and still be a manageable, fun experience. Cybernoid is not one of those games. It has fussy hitboxes, murky controls, and a real love for causing the player's craft to hang up on the scenery and demand perfect pixel control. It's quite easily one of the hardest games on NES, and that's really saying something. It's so hard, in fact, that I'm not sure that it was actually play-tested. Once I used cheat codes to get me to the 3rd stage, I end up getting hung up in a piece of scenery that I couldn't actually free myself from, and where nothing could hit me to destroy me. The game ended right there, which seems kind of like the sort of thing that a little playtesting would have resolved. And that's just in easy mode. The maximum difficulty setting triples the density of projectiles and boosts the speed of enemies, turning a seemingly impossible game into an exercise in absolute masochism. Cybernoid has a lot of elements that would become prevalent in Danmaku shooters half a decade later, such as dense bullet patterns and comically unrelenting infinite waves of random enemies. Unfortunately, the timing on this release means that Cybernoid does not benefit from the evolutionary design efforts that led to the creation of Danmaku game, which is to say that it lacks all of the features that made Danmaku intensely challenging, but ultimately fair. Namely, tight controls and generous hitboxes. The hitboxes on a player's ship and the various projectiles flying around in a Danmaku can often consist of a mere pixel or two, giving you the ability to weave through absolutely unreasonable torrents of bullets. Here, the instant the Cybernoid's sprite pixels so much as think about touching another element in the world, you die. The game gives you 9 lives, but those deplete so fast, you might think that someone cut a hole in the game's oil pan and let them all leak out into the street. Every screen of the game presents a self-contained challenge that players need to memorize, but those same self-contained challenges generally kind of suck. Some screens effectively demand you burn your single precious shield power-up in order to squeeze through a narrow space bombarded by relentless infinite bullets or Zako waves. Some, though, you can just pass through in a split second by making a tight corner turn and just completely skipping all of the hazards on that screen. It's pretty inconsistent and haphazard. Compare this to, say, I Want to Be the Guy, a game that would also consist of self-contained, single-screen challenges that required almost total dedication and memorization to complete. Unlike Cybernoid, I Want to Be the Guy would lean into its over-the-top difficulty and have fun with the whole concept by being so unfair, even breaking its own rules, that you couldn't be mad about it. Plus, it also had fairly forgiving, albeit tricky controls. Cybernoid looks on the surface to be a sort of blend of Air Fortress and, Castle Quest. But it feels worse and more demoralizing than either of those games. Not a promising start for the new NES developer making their debut on the console here. The identity of that developer is a bit murky, as Wikipedia claims it was handled by a company called Studio 12, though while that information appears pretty commonly in search results for Cybernoid, every single one of them simply quotes the unsourced claim on Wikipedia. A closer look at the individuals credited, particularly programmer Chris Harvey, points to Gremlin Graphics. Currently the boss at Blind Squirrel Studios, Chris Harvey's LinkedIn page suggests that he worked at Gremlin at the time of Cybernoid's creation. I realize I could just message him for clarification, but that seems really rude when I'm just asking for details so that I can talk trash about his work in a YouTube video. Good manners will be the death of journalism, I suppose. And here you thought it was going to be the oligarchs. In any case, the Gremlin claim provides a lot of valuable context. For one thing, Harvey's CV notes that he reverse-engineered the Famicom hardware to create an NES development kit. This is something that seems to show up in histories of Western publishers on NES hardware over and over again. Rare got its jump on NES development and became a vital Nintendo ally by reverse engineering the hardware. Argonaut, the company behind the Super FX chip, famously got up to shenanigans with acid baths so that Dylan Cuthbert could get his head around Nintendo's hardware. The late Rebecca Heinemann learned Japanese so she could tinker with Super Famicom SDKs and create RPM racing before Nintendo actually granted Americans access to the Super NES. Nintendo tends to be kind of slow at bringing Western studios into its inner circle. Even now, as we near the end of Switch 2's first year of existence, I know of a remarkable number of American companies who would very much like to become proper developers for that console, but still haven't been granted the keys to that kingdom. So, with that in mind, it's tough to come down too hard on Cybernoid. It's a frustrating game that feels really rough, but it's not like Nintendo reached out to Gremlin and Acclaim and said, hey guys, here's everything you need to make your very own Mega Man 2. And we will unfortunately be seeing quite a bit more of this as we move into the latter half of the NES chronology in NES Works 1990. I've mentioned this before, but Acclaim and LJN were the first 2 American publishers to set up shop on NES, building their early release rosters around games licensed from or commissioned to Japanese studios. This seems to have been more a matter of necessity than a sign of any particular respect for their brothers from another motherland. Once British and Australian developers like Rare, Beam, and Gremlin entered the scene, both publishers shifted their collaborations away from Japan. In fact, Cybernoid shipped at the same time as Knight Rider, the last Acclaim-published title that we'll see to emerge from a Japanese development studio outside of the Double Dragon sequels. And that means the company's future output comes from Western studios, whose collective approach to mastering the NES hardware appears to have been similar to the proverbial blind man determining the shape of an elephant by touch. But at least it's cool that Gremlin finally gives us another American studio on NES, you may think. Tengen and Imagineering need company. Heck, Tengen isn't even an approved developer at this point. But this is not the American Gremlin, based out of California, who worked closely with Sega during that company's early push into the US coin-op space. No, this is Gremlin Graphics, based out of Sheffield. Gremlin had quite a positive reputation in the UK back in the day. Like so many English development studios, they specialized in the ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64, and they did very impressive things with the Spectrum. They enjoyed some pretty big hits too, most notably the Monty the Mole games. Like a bunch of studios that had thrived on Spectrum, Gremlin clearly twigged to the fact that Europe's 8-bit microcomputers faced imminent extinction at the end of the 80s. Windows 3.1 was only a couple of years away, and it would strike the world with an extinction-level impact for nearly every other consumer-facing operating system. Of course, the folks at Gremlin and Beam couldn't have predicted that exactly, but they could clearly see the fact that even PC clone hardware and the MS-DOS operating system had made huge advantage in memory management and graphical options that the largely stagnant machines of the early 1980s simply couldn't keep up with. Spectrum specialists could either figure out the workings of Japanese consoles, the inexpensive mass market angle, or jump ship to computer platforms such as PC clones, Amiga, Atari ST, and Mac, the pricey, limited audience angle. Gremlin actually did a little bit of both. The company created plenty of computer games and a deluge of 16-bit and 32-bit console projects. They even had some hits, like the Zool series and the impressive Top Gear for Super NES. All in all, Gremlin Graphics, aka Gremlin Interactive, managed to navigate the demise of 8-bit micros with a lot more grace than the majority of European studios. Admittedly, you wouldn't know it from Cybernoid, but as an exercise in learning the ropes for an unfamiliar platform by faithfully converting a Spectrum game to more powerful hardware, it's about as good as you could realistically ask, which, admittedly, isn't great, but everyone's gotta start somewhere. Next time on NES Works, as Alice said, Kurosur and Kurosur.